The mop bucket nudges the chrome door as the melody wobbles and breaks. On the 20th floor, Mara's small hands hover over the keys, sightless but listening. Joe slides onto the same bench, steadying her wrist. "Here with your heart," he whispers. They begin Silent Night, Four Hands, breath sinks, pedal thumps, fluorescent lights buzz, winter wind scrapes the glass. Footsteps stop outside. A white sleeve ghosts across the reflection. He doesn't notice. Mara tilts her head at a winter citrus perfume she almost remembers. A security radio crackles. Joe tightens the tempo as the final chord swells. Will Grace arrive before the door swings wide? The building had a way of swallowing sound at night, like a theater holding its breath before the curtain lifts. Outside, winter pressed a cold palm to the glass, smearing the city into a watercolor of taillights and frost. Inside, fluorescent tubes hummed. A chrome door reflected a lonely mop bucket and the scuffed toes of Joe's work boots as he paused, listening. The melody inside the executive lounge was uncertain. 3 notes found, 1 note lost, a pause, then a shy return to the tune everyone knows once December arrives. He nudged the door with the bucket. The hinge gave a soft, polite sigh. Beyond a long conference table and a coffee machine huddling like a metal animal in the corner, an upright piano stood against the window, its black lacquer catching the hum of the city. A small girl sat at the bench, chin lifted, eyes unfixed. Her hands hovered over the keys, as if testing the temperature of a river. She played the opening to Silent Night, stopped on a split second of fear, then fumbled a mid-register note and shook her head once, frustrated. Joe cleared his throat the way people do when they arrive, without wanting to startle anyone. "Sorry," he said, voice low. "Didn't mean to interrupt." Her head turned toward the sound. No flicker of surprise in the eyes, only a quick tilt of the face. A listener's reflex. Her fingers remained poised over E and G. "The D keeps slipping away," she said. "I can hear where it should be. It's like a step that isn't there." "Maybe it's there," Joe offered, rolling the bucket to the wall. "Just hiding between breaths." She smiled with the left side of her mouth. "Between breaths is where I live." On her wrist, a slim bracelet caught the light. The engraving was tiny, but the 4 words were clear when she turned her hand. "Here with your heart." He recognized the phrase. He'd said it to his son 1,000 times when a homework page or a bad day started to win. He set his gloves on the closed lid of the coffee machine and approached slowly, conscious of how a floor can telegraph nerves. "It's okay," she said, sensing him draw near. "You can come closer." "Name's Joe," he said. "Mara." Her hands floated lower. "I know the first line, then the second line. Then the hallway of notes is too long." "Hallways can be long," he said, meaning it. The smell of winter citrus hung in the air, faint enough to be a memory. Not the air freshener. Their lemon was cheap and exact. This was subtle, expensive, a clean white scent that didn't apologize for itself. Someone had been here recently. The door behind him, he noticed, wasn't fully closed. He stood beside the bench, watched Mara turn toward the keyboard like a bird angling itself into a headwind. He'd played when he was a boy. A lesson and a half each month whenever the money stretched. Everything he knew he learned by sitting close to the piano, listening for what the notes did to the air. He could teach someone to hear that. He taught a child to fall asleep to the rhythm of a metronome that was just a heartbeat slowed down. "Try something," he said. "Scoot to the left, just a little. Mind if I sit?" She nodded at the exact pace of a metronome's click. He crossed himself under his breath, old habit, not piety, and sat on the same bench, careful to keep a respectful inch between them. 2 fingers from his right hand rested on the edge of the wood, not touching her, just locating the gravity of the space. "Breathe with me," he said softly. "In for 4, out for 4. We start the phrase on the exhale." She did it. He could hear the breath even, feel the small shift of her shoulder. "Good," he said. Now, I'll take the low notes. You find the top. If the hallway feels long, don't chase it. Wait in the doorway. The step will come to you. He brought in the left hand gently. C, G, C, a pedal press that deepened the room by a shade. Mara's right hand slipped from hovering to landing. B, C, B, G. The phrase appeared like a photograph in a tray of developer, soft at first, then certain. They moved together into a four-hands version that allowed him, with small nudges and quiet breaths, to hold the floor steady under her. Outside the door, footsteps stopped. He glanced at the chrome, where a reflection was trying to be a face and failing. A white sleeve entered the corner of the shine, the fabric catching the blue of the emergency exit sign. The citrus scent was back, clearer now. Whoever it was didn't enter. The hinge did not sigh again. Mara's ear tilted. "Someone's there," she whispered. "Probably a draft," he said, lying kindly. He anchored the harmony, and she, finding the courage in his steadiness, took the melody through the hard corridor. The D arrived under her finger as if it had always been loyal. Her small intake of triumphant breath was a bell in a winter church. He smiled, and for a bar or two forgot that he was on a clock and a camera, and that there are people who would say a janitor is paid to make noise disappear, not to make it sing. He guided with the smallest of gestures, no touching, only the ghost of a cue in the air. Now soften, now lean, now let the note finish speaking before the next sentence begins. They reached the cadence and let it bloom. The fluorescent buzz vanished into awe. Even the coffee machine seemed to hold its heat without complaint. A radio crackled in the hallway. 20, you copy?" a voice asked. The reflection of the white sleeve moved. The faint citrus stood up, walked carefully away. The footsteps receded with the efficiency of someone who owns their time. Mara whispered, "That perfume, clean like paper and snow." He busied his hands on the keyboard's fallboard, lowering it halfway, a sign to a camera that this was a pause, not a rebellion. In the pause he heard the near, inaudible hum of the air system and the night speaking to the glass. He thought of his son, asleep 2 neighborhoods away, of bills layered like roof shingles, of the way a song can do the work money tries to do and sometimes fails. "One more time?" he asked. She lifted her chin. Courage, this time, was hers. "One more time." They played it again. This time he changed the harmony on the second phrase, offered her a small step-stool of chords to climb over the valley of the unknown. She found the melody with a surer hand, her wrist loose in the way of people who trust what their ears are capable of painting. When they reached the last chord, he let the pedal ring a fraction longer. Sound pooled around their feet like warm water. "Here with your heart," he said, quietly enough that it could have been a thought. Mara touched her bracelet. "That's what it says." "I know," he said. The chrome door gathered a new reflection. A badge gliding past the stripe of light underneath, a brief electronic chirp from the lock, reading a key card. Joe's stomach tightened. If it was Mason Torres on his rounds, this wouldn't be a conversation he could win. The rulebook on the bulletin board downstairs was written in all caps when it came to executive spaces after hours. He rose an inch from the bench, then sat again. "Running doesn't make love truer." "Will you come again?" Mara asked, as if asking about the return of a season. Joe found himself nodding before he heard what his mouth was saying. "Yes," he said, "because music makes promises adults are too careful to speak out loud." "Same time." Her hands returned to their hover, ready at any hour for a reason to land. The radio in the hall crackled again, closer this time. "Copy, I'm on 20, a man's voice said. A pause. "Thought I heard." "Never mind." The citrus air was gone. Whoever had been there left nothing but the idea of white fabric moving with a precise economy. Joe set the piano lid down fully, then lifted it again. Just enough for breath, not enough for scolding. He rolled the mop bucket to his side and took up the handle. Every sound ordinary, every action necessary. "Tomorrow," Mara said. She didn't say please. Hope doesn't always need manners. He walked backward 2 steps, then turned, then paused with a hand on the chrome. Behind him, he felt the room the way you feel the presence of a person you love, even in their quiet. A camera's red dot might have blinked. Or maybe the dot was the city outside, winking through frost. Either way, something had watched. The door gave the same soft sigh when it closed. In the hallway, the badge chirped again, the soft, polite way technology says you're allowed. Joe's heartbeat settled into a workingman's pace. He pushed the bucket toward the elevator, counted the seconds until the ding. He didn't see the woman in the white suit down the corridor, half turned toward the window, breathing the last of the citrus she wore like a decision. She held her hands together, as if weighing a cord in her palms. When the elevator opened for Joe, she faced the glass again, and the city lit her like a stage. The elevator doors slid shut. Somewhere behind, a piano key, D, was pressed once, by no hand, by memory alone. A badge scanner beeps at the lounge again as Joe steps into the elevator. Someone re-enters the room he just left. Is it security or the silent listener in white? Night made the building honest. By day, it performed polish and purpose. After hours, it surrendered to hums and drafts and the patient ticking of thermostats. On the 20th floor, the lounge learned to breathe with 2 bodies. The first night after the meeting, Joe arrived early enough to wipe the piano's keys with a soft cloth, a ritual he'd invented to make courage feel like maintenance. The mop bucket waited near the coffee machine, guileless as a dog. He left the chrome door almost closed. The hinge liked to sigh, and the sigh was their curtain rising. Mara was already there, sitting like a question before a yes. "I counted 60 heartbeats," she said. "That's how long I thought you might be late." "But 60 means exactly on time," Joe said. He sat on the same bench, their shoulders sharing the bench's small democracy. "Tonight we listen for what's between the notes." "Between," she repeated, savoring the edge of the word. Her fingers hovered. The bracelet caught a thin seam of light, here with your heart, and then fell quiet again, as if words also had to hold their breath before music. He had brought no sheet music. He believed in paper, but not for this. He set his left foot on the pedal and kept it there just long enough to thicken the air, then released. "Hear that?" "It's the room," she said. "It's the room remembering." He laid a low C and let it bloom, the sound painting a circle you could stand inside. Between the notes is where the room talks back. If we push, we scare it off. "Then we wait," she said, and didn't play. The second night, the city wore snow like a rumor. The glass shivered. He showed her how to lean into a phrase without hurrying it. "Taste the corner of the note," he said, "like the crust of a pie." And she laughed at the simile and then did it, and the laugh stayed in the chord as warmth, like a lamp left on in a cold kitchen. He moved the metronome on his phone to the edge of the piano, where she could feel its pulse in the wood. She disliked the tick, but liked the way the tick told the floor how to behave. On the 3rd night, he introduced silence as a partner. "If you can't find the next step," he said, "let the silence extend a palm and help you down." He demonstrated with 2 bars of Silent Night, then stopped, hand hovering. The room tilted forward the tiniest bit, listening. Mara mirrored him. The pause lengthened until it was almost a dare. Then she landed the next note as if it had come to meet her halfway, and the dare turned into grace. Routine made a map. Joe cleaned the executive hallway in a quick rectangle first, so nobody could say he wasn't doing his job. He learned that Mason Torres called up to dispatch each round. "Copy, I'm on 19. Copy, moving to 20. And that there was a narrow window between the end of 19 and the start of 20, when a man could sit on a bench and be more than a bucket. He learned the elevator's ding could be mistaken for a high A if you were convinced enough. He learned to wipe condensation from the chrome door because reflections tell things before people are ready to say them out loud. They practiced four hands. He took the lower register, a warm road. She took the melody, a narrow path with fallen leaves. The first time their pinkies brushed, she snatched her hand back as if she had accidentally stepped into someone's line in a waiting room. "Sorry," she said. "Keep the hand," he said. "Music forgives what it needs." By the end of the week, their breaths matched without instruction. He would lower his shoulders and feel hers lower a heartbeat later, a school of fish turning as if one mind lived along the length of them. He taught dynamics without naming them, because names can scare off courage. "Make this like the end of a sentence that doesn't need a period," he said, and she softened the phrase into a hush that left the city outside uncertain whether it had been included. "Now make this like a window opening," he said, and she widened the sound until even the coffee machine seemed to straighten. Sometimes the scent arrived before the footsteps, clean, deliberate, winter with fruit. Joe never spoke of it, but Mara would lift her head with a fox's economy, find the place where the air was thinner and whisper, "She's here." The citrus would wait in the doorway, like someone who had already paid for her time and wanted to spend it carefully. A white sleeve would ghost across a reflection, then disappear when the radio crackled. The lounge learned to pretend it was empty when it was full. One night the heater coughed and failed for a minute. The temperature stepped down a degree, then another. Joe rubbed his palms together and was about to suggest they stop when Mara said, "The cold makes the notes clearer, like snow around footsteps." He listened. She was right. The hard edges helped her locate the pitch by the way it cut the air. They played the carol once, and then again slower, and the cold sharpened the consonants of their sound until each key was a spoken truth. Another night, he brought a small felt square and showed her the trick of laying it lightly on the strings for a single note to change the color without silencing it. "You're painting," he said, "not with eyes, with pressure." She laughed again, delighted to be a painter. The bracelet tapped the fallboard by accident and chimed like a tiny bell in a chapel only 2 people attended. "Here with your heart," she said half-mockingly, to tease his seriousness. The phrase opened something in him that he hid by cleaning a smudge that hadn't been there. He learned as much as she did. Mara taught him that a room is a map of breath, that the difference between lost and searching is whether you call out. She taught him that waiting isn't surrender if you do it with attention. He carried these lessons down to the utilities closet 3 floors below, where the schedules were taped to the wall and the fluorescent hum was faithless. He found himself counting heartbeats while the dryer spun the rags, and on the count of 60 he would breathe and know something was coming he could meet. Mason almost found them on a Tuesday. The radio stuttered, then cleared. 20, I'm moving early," Mason said. Traffic had thinned. His rounds shifted with weather. Joe caught the phrase and looked at the chrome door, which had fogged with their playing. "Break," he whispered. They lifted their hands at once, each finger a parachute. He set the fallboard down, slid from the bench and reached for the bucket. The door sighed. Mason's figure cut into the hallway like a brisk pencil line. "Evening," Mason said, not unkind. His eyes traveled the room in a triangle. Piano, coffee machine, mop. "Everything quiet?" "Quiet," Joe said. The room agreed by being perfect at it. Mason listened to silence the way some people listen to music. His head tilted. Joe knew his own pulse had moved into his throat. Mara sat very still, hands folded, the picture of a child waiting politely in a room that did not belong to her. Mason's gaze softened a half-shade. Children disarm authority not by cuteness but by clarity. He clicked his radio once and moved on. The citrus, faint but present, seemed to linger behind him like an alibi. They resumed after the elevator swallowed him. This time, Mara asked to start. "I want to lead," she said, and there was no apology in it. Joe looked at her small back, straight as decision. He gave her the downbeat without touching, a conductor whose baton was his breathing. She took the melody in both hands and let him find the underpinning. Where she hesitated, he laid a chord under her like a plank to cross a stream. Where she flew, he thinned to a thread so her line could gleam. "Again," she said after the cadence. He nodded. They did it again. Their 4 hands learned to braid. He discovered that his left hand's weight could calm her right, that his right hand's grace could invite her left. He whispered cues that were more idea than instruction. "Soft knees," he said, and she laughed at the absurdity of knees for fingers and then softened anyway. "Let the note finish its sentence," he said, and she waited until the air itself released the period. On Friday, the snow finally committed. The city below became a graphite drawing on paper with good teeth. Joe had polished the keys too bright and felt ridiculous about it, then relieved. They deserved to shine. 2 floors beneath, someone was throwing a holiday party. The faraway thump of bass made the lounge's quiet more precise. Mara arrived in a wool hat with a pom, the bracelet glinting at her wrist. "I asked for 5 more minutes," she said, rebellious and pleased. "They said yes because I asked like a grown-up." "Play like one," Joe said, and immediately regretted the edge in his voice, then didn't. Edges teach. They decided, without deciding, to perform the entire carol from first note to last. No scaffolding, no plank offered midstream. Joe counted 4 with a breath. Mara nodded, chin pointed toward a horizon nobody else could see. He set the bass. She took the line. The second phrase, the one that had been a hallway too long on the first night, opened of its own accord, doors unlocking with a click neither of them made. Her D, once a missing step, landed firm as a promise kept. Midway through, the chrome door polished a truth neither of them noticed. A pale shape in the hall, still as a thought, the white sleeve paused just outside the threshold. The citrus came in on a soft draught and sat in the corner like a ghost with excellent posture. The song did not stumble. If anything, the presence pushed Mara higher, made her wrist fluid, made Joe brave enough to thin his chords until the melody could bear its own bright weight. They arrived together at the final cadence. He left the pedal down half a breath, released, then touched it again to catch the echoes and bring them home. Mara lifted her hands last, in a gesture that was almost benediction. Her face had the expression people get when a story knows how to end. "Again?" Joe asked, "because joy is greedy." "Again," she said. The radio barked in the hall, too loud this time to pretend away. 20 status?" Mason asked, the words edged with the chapped impatience of winter. The white sleeve disappeared from the chrome. The perfume remained. Footsteps approached. Harder steps, not Mason's measured pace. A second badge chirped at the reader, brighter, confident. "Who is—" Joe began. The door handle turned. The chrome door swings inward, and a figure in a white suit crosses the threshold, accompanied not by Mason's radio, but by silence dense as judgment. Is their hidden classroom about to be ended, or offered a stage? The handle turned and the chrome door opened on a wedge of white, not a blizzard, fabric. The suit stepped in first, then the woman, composed as a metronome. Vivian Hale carried silence the way some people carry status. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The room tightened its tie. Joe rose halfway from the bench. Mara's hands hovered, then settled in her lap, small birds agreeing not to fly. The citrus in the air clarified to intention. "Don't stop," Vivian said, voice low enough to be private, strong enough to be law. She lifted a palm, not a command, a blessing. "Finish your phrase." Then she stepped back to the doorframe, as if unwilling to steal the last light of a measure already written. Joe sat again, heartbeat ticking 8th notes. He met Mara's steady face, nodded once. They resumed. The final cadence landed with the contained radiance of a candle lit in daylight, unnecessary, therefore beautiful. Vivian's chin dipped a fraction, a bow priests and judges spend years learning. The radio in the hall barked like an ill-timed cough. 20! Status check! Mason Torres said. The illusion shattered. Vivian's white sleeve withdrew. Her eyes flicked toward the corridor with the economy of someone used to choosing moments. She slipped out just as Mason's keycard chirped and his steps padded in. Evening, Mason said, eyes scanning from mop to bench to keyboard, where the keys still trembled with the after-image of sound. His gaze landed on Joe's hands, then on Mara's bracelet, then on the fallboard half lowered as if guilt weighed the hinge. Practice, Joe heard himself say, already aware of how foolish the word sounded in a room designed for deals. Mason's head tipped, listening to a silence that told on them. This area is executives only, he said. Not cruel, just the shape of policy given a mouth. He looked at Mara. Children tug at the sleeves of men who enforce lines, and then back at Joe. You're paid to clean. The sentence landed with the exactness of a stamp on paper. Joe felt its ink spread. He stood. Understood. Good, Mason said, not triumphantly. He wasn't a villain. He was gravity. Let's call tonight a misunderstanding. I'll note it. But if I log this as usual, it becomes a thing. He checked the hall with a habit born from blame. Doors stay closed. After hours, no guests, especially not lessons. He let the last word hover like a moth. Understood. Mara's chin lifted. We weren't breaking anything, she said. Her voice was clear as glass. We were fixing a hallway that's too long. Mason's mouth pressed, then relaxed. He had a daughter somewhere in his eyes. I'm sure, he said. To Joe, do your rounds. I'll check back. He left. The hinge sighed, as if embarrassed at being caught in company. Joe stared at the keys. The urge to promise was a drum in his chest. But promises are contracts. Contracts require signatures, and he was nobody's pen. We'll stop, he said to the room, which was safer than saying it to the child. Mara's hand found the bracelet, thumb pressing the word heart, as if it could click like a badge reader. When you stop a song in the middle, she said, the silence feels like a bruise. He cleaned. He cleaned as if polish could undo policy, as if a high gloss could argue. He emptied bins and wiped counter edges that already gleamed. He took the elevator down and mopped a lobby so clean it reflected strangers into better versions of themselves. He clocked out later than he should and lay in the narrow bed that fit his life, listening to the radiator tick like a metronome set to a hard truth. Sleep did not arrive. Responsibility did, and sat on the edge of the mattress checking its watch. The next night, he told himself he wouldn't go up. He told himself again, at 9, at 9:15, at 9:30. By 9:40, he was on the 20th floor with a mop bucket moving like a confession beside him. He didn't touch the chrome. He listened. The lounge was a throat before a word. Then the word arrived. One note, then two, then the stubborn hallway. Mara had come anyway. She was playing alone, and the D slipped again and again, a step missing in a well-known staircase. Joe stood there and felt the small break in her music, like a child's cough in the night. You don't debate, you go. He pushed the door. The hinge didn't sigh. It forgave. We'll be quick, he whispered, as if the room itself was a jury. Mara lifted her face toward him, a sunflower unfazed by clouds. I counted 60, she said. Then 60 more. Last time, he said, and knew it would not be true unless he made it true. He sat. Their shoulders learned each other again. They began from the beginning, but slower, as if unspooling a ribbon you want to reuse unmangled. Breathe, he said. Between, she said. They played. He gave her the plank over the creek in the exact bar where she had always fallen in. She placed her foot, finger on it, and didn't even look down. In the second verse, he thinned his left hand to a thread, let her melody walk alone. She did not stumble. The air in the room changed temperature. the way air does when memory becomes skill. At the end, he didn't lift the pedal in time. He let it ring because endings deserve weather. The radio crackled louder this time, with authority on the channel. 20, where are you? Mason asked. The door opened before Joe could manufacture a reason. Mason stood there with a clipboard that made his hand official. Behind him, a man from HR hovered, face practiced into neutrality. The clipboard smelled like forms, and forms are simply stories that have stopped listening. Mason's eyes registered disappointment more than anger. We had this conversation, he said. We did, Joe agreed. Truth is flatter than excuses. He offered it anyway. HR cleared his throat. Joe, he said. Names are how people fight to remain human. Joe, the man repeated, briefly humanized. We respect your dedication, but liability is not a carol. We have to document this. There have been prior concerns regarding boundaries in executive spaces after hours. He looked to Mason as if sharing the weight. Effective immediately. We're ending your assignment on the 20th floor. And... A pause, paperwork riffling. There's a staffing cut. We can transfer you to night sanitation at the warehouse annex. It's less visible. Pay is lower by $2 an hour. The math did itself in Joe's head. $2 an hour is groceries when you count in cans. He inhaled, stilling the panic so it wouldn't leak into his voice and make the room smell like fear. I understand. Mara's hand found his jacket sleeve, a flare of contact that broke every rule but the right one. He's my teacher, she said, as if describing a fact like weather. HR's mouth softened, then hardened. I'm sorry, he said, and he might have meant it, meaning doesn't sign checks. Mason didn't touch Joe, respect or policy or both. I'll give you 10 minutes, he said. The words poured a gentleness into the room that policy couldn't drink. He stepped back into the hall and stood there like a door that could not be closed. They sat again. One last time, Joe said, and believed it because it hurt. They played not to win, but to finish. Without the pressure of being allowed, the music entered a clarity neither had found before. In the third phrase, the one with the missing step, Mara reached it without thinking. The hallway wasn't long anymore, just honest. Joe's hands were steady, the way a man's hands are steady when he's holding the back of a chair to stay upright. At the cadence, he lifted the pedal exactly on time. Silence arrived clean. Mara set her palms flat on the full board. I'll keep it inside, she said, and closed the lid carefully, as if laying a blanket over something sleeping. Mason returned with an envelope that had weight, but not warmth. HR had decamped, relief trailing him like steam. There's a shuttle at the loading dock, Mason said. He looked at Mara, then back at Joe. You didn't hear this from me, but not everyone upstairs is blind to value. It was the closest he'd come to rebellion. In the elevator, the lights were kind. Joe held the envelope like a small dead bird. When the doors opened at the lobby, the holiday party on the lower floors spilled laughter into the air. The bass thumped. Lights made promises they would not keep. 2 nights later, Joe was scrubbing a concrete floor that didn't know the word gleam. The warehouse annex smelled of cardboard and winter. He learned the rhythm of forklifts and the sigh of heater ducts. At midnight break, he texted no one the truth and everyone the lie. Pay less by $2 is a sentence that gets shorter when you say it out loud. It remains the same length at the register. On the 20th floor, the piano learned to be furniture again. Mara returned once with a guardian who scrolled a phone in a chair that looked expensive and tired. She lifted the fallboard, placed her fingers, and couldn't make her hands land. The D went missing, but this time it wasn't a step. It was a person-shaped silence. She closed the lid and sat very still, the bracelet cold against her skin. "Hear with your heart," she whispered. But her heart was crowded and could not hear itself. Down in the annex, Joe turned off his music so the foreman wouldn't comment. He kept time by counting to 60, then to 60 more. In the Count, he heard a memory like a key in his pocket. On a Sunday morning, a notice went out to staff. New philanthropic initiative announcement. Monday, 9 a.m., Executive Lounge, 20th floor. Joe didn't receive it. His inbox had been clipped with his hours. But somewhere between forklifts and concrete, a rumor found him. The woman in white was starting something with a dawn in its name. He looked at his hands, scrub raw and strong. He thought of a child's D. He thought of the difference between cleaning a room and making it sing. He thought of doors and who decides which ones sigh and which ones swing. At 8:59 a.m. The chrome door on the 20th floor opens. Not for security, but for a podium, draped in white, and Vivian Hale at its side, eyes on the piano. Is this the end of a secret, or the beginning of a stage? Morning painted the 20th floor a softer color than night ever allowed. The lounge's chrome gleamed like a fresh decision. A thin podium stood by the piano, skirted in white, and a modest arrangement of winter branches leaned toward the glass as if to watch the city wake. Assistants in dark suits arranged cups and water bottles, the way stagehands set props for a magic trick that would insist it wasn't one. When Vivian Hale stepped in, the room adjusted its posture. The winter citrus note preceded her like a calling card that needed no ink. She touched the piano's fullboard with 2 fingers, a small private gesture, then moved to the podium. No mic, she preferred rooms to learn how to listen. "Thank you for coming," she said. Her voice carried the quiet that follows a hammer finding the right nail. "Today, we're establishing the Aurora Foundation, an effort to fund arts education where it's an afterthought or an apology." She paused, letting the word effort mean both money and muscle. "I'll be brief, then I'll be specific." In the second row, Mason Torres stood with his hands at parade rest, radio silent but ready, clipboard leaves tucked like feathers. HR hovered nearby, eyes practicing neutrality again. A few department heads, a photographer with a camera set to be respectful. Vivian glanced at the piano once more, then back to the small crowd. "We invest in what we measure," she said. "Too often, we measure output and miss outcome. A child counted 60 heartbeats while waiting to be seen. In those heartbeats, a city failed, and music did not." She turned the page on the podium, even though there was nothing written on it. "The foundation will pilot scholarships, instruments, teacher stipends, and accessible spaces after hours, because talent does not punch a clock." Joe wasn't there. Down at the annex, he was angling a squeegee down a concrete aisle and letting the sound fill his head where music normally lived. He had not been invited and would have declined the invitation on principle and then regretted his principles on the bus ride home. The rumor had found him. He'd filed it under things for other people. He wrung out the mop and counted a quiet that wasn't music but could be if you squinted. On 20, Vivian closed the few inches between concept and choice. "I won't name names," she said, which is how people in white suits name names. "But I will name value. I watched a child cross a hallway of notes that had previously been too long. She crossed because someone laid planks under each step, not with hands, but with breath." She faced Mason, directly now. On that night, protocol was observed. Value was not. Mason absorbed the sentence like a professional punch. He'd made the call that policy required, and he knew it. He also knew what he had seen in that room. A piano, behaving like a bridge. "Ma'am," he said quietly, deferential without surrender. Vivian turned to HR. "Who signed the reduction for Joseph?" "Joe." "Cole." HR's throat worked. "The staffing change was recommended by facilities after a series of—" "It was signed by you?" Vivian asked, removing buffer zones. "Yes or no?" "Yes," he said, and in that yes were comp spreadsheets and emails with subject lines that looked like absolution. "Rescind it," she said, "retroactive to the hour it was executed. Restore back pay and benefits. Transfer authority for the lounge and related cultural assets to the Aurora Foundation, effective now. She pivoted, white fabric catching the daylight like a sail. And write this down. Joe Cole is to be brought to the 20th floor at noon. I'll meet him here. The photographer did not take that photo. He tilted the lens to the winter branches instead and clicked once, the sound a respectful amen. Mason breathed. Relief is not disobedience when it serves the truth your uniform was meant to guard. Ma'am, he said again, the syllable now bent towards service rather than defense. I'll bring him. Vivian nodded. Thank you, Mr. Torres. She looked at the piano. We're not done. By noon, the annex floor reflected a man's face that had learned to hide hope. Mason appeared at the loading dock, a white company van behind him, idling like a neutral sentence. Joe, he called across concrete that smelled like cardboard and winter. You're wanted upstairs. By HR? Joe asked, dry mouth turning humor into chaff. By Ms. Hale, Mason said. He lowered his voice the way you lower a rope down a well. The woman in white. Joe climbed into the van. On the way up through the building's esophagus of elevators and hallways, he tried to unthink the ways a man rehearses disappointment to soften the real thing. Mason didn't speak. No radio chatter, the channel was holding its breath. The chrome door sighed for them, like an old friend who knows when not to tease. The lounge looked the same and not the same. The podium had been removed, but its absence felt like stage lights cooling. Vivian stood by the window, one hand on the fallboard again, as if learning what the wood could tell her. Mr. Cole, she said, names can be swords or bridges. Hers was a bridge. Thank you for coming. He nodded, unsure where to put his hands. Ms. Hale, she gestured to the bench. Sit. Then she sat too, not beside him. 2 feet away, at 45 degrees, the geometry of respect. I owe you 2 things, apology and assignment. He looked down. The last envelope he'd been handed was neither. You don't owe me anything. Then I'll pay what isn't owed. She held his gaze, then let it go. I observed you here. Not once, repeatedly. I listened to a child learn to trust time because you made it trustworthy. Her hand hovered above middle C, then retreated. She had the discipline not to make a point with sound when words would do. I shouldn't have watched in secret. I did. I won't again. He waited. Silence isn't awkward when a room has practiced. She's my daughter, Vivian said. The molecules changed. The citrus in the air found a new octave. The winter branches by the window stilled, as if the city itself didn't wish to be rude. Joe had suspected some closeness. Perfume knows a body, but mother isn't a closeness. It's a country with its own laws. He looked at the piano so he wouldn't look at her like a man trying to solve her. Mara, he said, and the name did all the work. Yes. Vivian's face held, but her voice tilted. Her world is precise. People try to make it soft. You didn't. You made it musical. She set a folder on the bench between them like a treaty. The Aurora Foundation will fund a program here and in 3 partner schools. Accessible after-hours pianos, teacher training, and commissions for new works for young hands. We want you to lead it. Along a far wall, a screen flickered to life with a slide. Aurora Foundation, Arts in Reach. Below, a bullet list. Director of Music, FT. Benefits, studio access, commission. The things we cannot see. The font was clean, which is another way of saying the money was real. Joe found his mouth moving around a shape it hadn't made in a while. I'm a janitor. Titles name pasts, she said. Roles shape futures. She slid the folder closer. Director of Music, Composer in Residence, Teacher. The program starts with Mara. It will not end with her. Mason had drifted to the hallway, radio off, but ready to carry whatever needed carrying. HR arrived. pale with the effort of being both correct and forgiven. Vivian didn't look at them. She kept her eyes on Joe because that is where the hinge now lived. "I've already asked too much," Joe said, truth walking in without shoes. "I cost you policy. I cost myself dignity in a room I didn't belong in." "That room belonged to sound," Vivian said. "We were the guests." She faced the piano fully. "Play something she could walk across." He stared at the keys. His left hand knew the way to kindness, his right knew its cost. He placed both gently and let a progression appear that wasn't Silent Night, but had its bones. A winter hymn with a warm middle, a phrase that invited a foot to step where there had once been a gap. He didn't play long. He didn't have to. The room filled in the spaces because it had learned how. When he lifted his hands, the glass gave back a version of him that wasn't better, just truer. Vivian stood. "Mr. Torres," she called softly. Mason stepped in. He looked less like a rule and more like a person who had been released from a posture. "Ma'am?" "Effective immediately," she said, still watching Joe. "Reassign security oversight of this floor to the Foundation's evening program. Your rank remains. Your role changes. Community liaison. You'll help us keep doors responsibly open." She turned then and met Mason's eyes. "You were right to call the rule. Help me write a better one." Mason nodded, something like relief and purpose shaking hands in his face. "Yes, ma'am." HR cleared a throat, then did the thing that allowed him to be proud later. He asked, "How can I help?" Vivian told him. He wrote it down. Outcomes grew branches. The chrome door whispered again, and Mara stepped in, guardian trailing, hat with a pom pressed to her chest. She found the piano by the way sound pools around furniture, smiled toward the air that held certainty, and tilted her head. "You smell like snow," she said to Vivian, "which is how children say I know you without seeing you." Vivian's breath hitched, then landed. "Here," she said, and took Mara's hand, placing it on the bench. "With your heart." Mara felt the wood, then the slight warmth where Joe's shoulder had been. "Did I miss the meeting?" she asked. "You are the meeting," Vivian said. Joe shifted to make room but didn't step away. He closed the full board halfway, their sign, then lifted it again, their permission. "Shall we?" he asked. "Between," Mara said and sat. The bracelet glinted like a promise about to keep itself. Vivian didn't sit. She stood behind them, hands folded the way a conductor folds a baton into patience. "One condition," she added, gentle but steel. "We'll premiere a new piece in a year. Title's already chosen." She looked at Joe, who was already nodding because he knew, "The things we cannot see." Mara's fingers hovered over a first note that wasn't just a note. Outside, the city dressed itself in early evening, even though it wasn't late. Inside, a foundation took its first breath. Joe places his hands on the keys to begin a new life, when a voice from the doorway interrupts, the board chair, asking if this public bet on music will pay in numbers. Can art answer in time for the year ahead? The auditorium wasn't grand. It was right, wood that remembered trees, a stage lined with risers like terraces in a careful garden. The piano, upright by choice, sat stage left, lacquered black into a small night of its own. Overhead, lights warmed from rehearsal white to evening amber as families settled, coats slipping from shoulders, whispers finding their hush. A banner in clean type read, "Aurora Foundation, Premiere, The Things We Cannot See." Backstage, Joe checked a page that didn't need checking. He had written the program notes himself in words that didn't apologize, a suite for young hands and brave listeners. Movements about breath, steps, and rooms that learn to speak. He folded the paper, slid it into a pocket, and turned to the corridor where Mason Torres stood, making order look like welcome. "Full house," Mason said, smiling like a man who'd traded a rulebook for a compass. "Numbers look good," Joe teased, because in this building numbers had once meant mercy. "Good enough to make the board chair clap on the 2 and the 4. Mason said. Go make the rest of it not matter. At the edge of the wings, Vivian Hale lifted her head toward the hum of the crowd. The winter citrus note had become shorthand for permission. She wore white again, not as armor, but as a frame to let sound be the color. When she caught Joe's eye, she didn't give a speech with her face. She gave a small nod that said, "Deliver what we promised and what couldn't be promised." The house lights sank a shade. The MC, an art teacher whose laugh had carried the program through drywall and doubt, stepped up and invited the audience to breathe. "Tonight you'll hear pieces written for hands that are still learning their courage," she said. "If a note lands late, think of it as time-making room. You'll also hear the premiere of a suite by our director of music, Mr. Joe Cole." Applause rolled. Joe didn't absorb it. He let it pass over him like warm rain. "And you'll meet our young leader for the final movement," the MC added, "someone who reminded us that music begins between the notes." The first group took the stage. 3 students sharing a xylophone like a picnic blanket, careful mallets finding paths not printed on the bars. A boy with nervous hair played a 2-note ostinato that held a girl's melody like a railing. The second group paired recorders with a soft drum, fragile reeds threading through rhythm that forgave. Parents leaned forward, phones held up, eyes held wider. The room, which had once been a ledger, became a listener. Between sets, Joe slid into the wings with a cloth for palms that didn't need drying. His suit wasn't fancy. It fit because Hope had taken his measurements slowly. Mara stood by the piano, fingertips learning the instrument's edge like a coastline. Her wrist bracelet, "Here with your heart," caught the stage light and sent it quietly back. "Ready?" he asked, voice tuned to the distance between them. "Between," she said, and smiled toward the sound of his breath. She had grown 1.5 inches, and a discipline you couldn't measure by inches. The cane she used for halls rested backstage, not because pride had outlawed it, but because the stage had been mapped in rehearsal by steps and counts, and the soft bell of the pedal. Tonight, the map was inside her. The board chair waited with a ledger's eyebrows near the front row. He had asked hard questions a year ago about outcomes, deliverables, and who would clap if the money did its work right. Vivian had answered in sentences that didn't blink. Tonight, the chair sat with his spouse, hands folded over a program he'd already creased by accident like a human. Joe walked to center under a hush that understood why it was hushed. He didn't bow. He nodded, then turned to the piano and spoke into the instrument, the way some people speak into a well to see if the earth answers. The first movement began with 1 note left hanging longer than politeness. An invitation. Children from the after-hours cohort entered one by one, each with a simple figure that sounded honest when played correctly and beautiful when played fiercely. A piccolo phrase became a stare. A viola offered a street lamp. A small drum measured walking. Second movement, steps. Joe had written it to forgive the wobble. Harmonies arrived early and then waited for the melody to catch up, teaching the audience how to listen without grading. A boy missed an entrance and then found it so decisively that the audience learned the benchmark for courage. Applause rustled where applause usually doesn't. The conductor, a woman with kindness in her wrists, let it sit and then set the next tempo like a table. Third movement, rooms. Joe shifted to the bench and found the lower register with the tenderness of a man finding an old street in a new city. He laid chords that held space. Students braided around him as if decorating a tree, not with ornaments, but with insistence. The room answered, as rooms do once they learn their part. Somewhere in row G, a toddler laughed once at a note that sounded like a friendly door. Laughter is a kind of tuning. The fourth movement was short. Silences. 4 measured rests in which the audience had been asked in the program to breathe out for counts of 4. You can hear a room exhale. The board chair did, and felt slightly foolish, and then slightly larger, as if his spine had been dusted. Then the lights warmed a shade, and the MC's voice returned, softer. "For the final movement," she said, "we welcome Mara, who will lead us from the same piano where she first learned to find the step that wasn't there." Mara came on stage to the sound of 100 people remembering not to stand too quickly. She found the bench without hands guiding her, counted 4, turned, and sat. Joe took the space beside her, not as savior or shadow, but as the other half of a breathing organism. Vivian stood at the side aisle, not watching like a CEO, but like a mother who understood that watching is a verb with consequences. Movement 5. The things we cannot see. It began where a carol used to begin and then didn't, a cousin to Silent Night that bowed to its ancestor and then walked a different street. Joe's left hand laid the road. Mara took the line in the right, climbed to the D that had once refused her, and placed her finger there without ceremony. She didn't celebrate landing. She continued walking. The audience heard the absence of stumble and realized what it meant, and then realized the meaning wasn't theirs. They listened harder. Halfway through, Joe thinned his chords until only a thread held. Mara kept going. The orchestra of children, small winds, a shy cello, 2 triangles held by earnest hands, wove in under her, turning her melody into a bridge others could cross. At the phrase that used to scare her, Joe removed his left hand entirely and set it in his lap, trusting the air to carry. Mara didn't flinch. She took the corner wide and smooth and led them to a cadence that didn't close so much as open. A breath passed through the audience like a tide. Vivian's fingers tightened once at her side and then released. Mason, at the back, looked like a man inventing a new posture and deciding to keep it. For the coda, Joe returned with a harmony he had not shown in rehearsal, a small risk, a larger faith. He placed it under Mara's last line, a warm plank exactly where it would be needed if she decided to leap. She did. It wasn't a leap of technique. It was a leap of belief. The note landed and rang. Joe lifted the pedal just late enough to let the ring turn into memory before it died. Silence arrived, not empty, not relieved, full. Then sound, not a roar, but a standing made of knees and conviction. The board chair rose first by accident. His program slipped and he followed it, and then on purpose. He clapped in time. Numbers applauded alongside names. Mara didn't bow. She tilted her head toward the place where she knew Vivian stood. "Here," she said, not into the microphone, but it carried anyway. "Here," Vivian answered, voice small and enormous. Joe felt the world align by inches. He looked nowhere in particular and saw everything. A janitor's hands given a different set of keys, a security guard with a new job description that made keeping in become letting in, a foundation that learned to measure outcome before output. He heard in the applause a rhythm he could carry back to mornings when floors still needed to shine. After, in the lobby, the board chair found him near a table of paper cups and decided to practice a new language. "I asked about return on investment," he said, not apologizing, not defending. "Tonight I understood a kind we don't chart." He extended a hand. Joe took it without making a ceremony out of it. A girl from the second movement tugged Mason's sleeve. "Mr. Torres, did I play the rest right?" And Mason crouched to make his ear level with her answer. Vivian stood beside Mara, not touching her, just close enough to be a horizon. Reporters hovered in a reasonable ellipse, questions warm. The photographer from that first morning shot frames that didn't need captions. Back on stage, the piano waited with its lid half open, as if the room might ask for seconds. Joe slipped away from the congratulations to give the instrument a thank you that wasn't spoken. He touched the fallboard and left a print that would evaporate before morning. His reflection in the lacquer looked like a man trying out a future and discovering it fit. "Joe," said a voice behind him. "Vivian." He turned. She held a small envelope, plain, the sort that could hold either trouble or grace. "Commission installment," she said, then smiled at his caution. "Also a note from Mara." He opened the second paper first. It wasn't long, braille dots in neat lines, and below them her words transcribed in a font that didn't try too hard. "Thank you for the hallway." He folded it so the fold wouldn't interrupt any meaning. "Tell her," he said, voice not steady but honest. "The step was hers." "Tell her yourself," Vivian said. "She's waiting by the stage door. She wants to show you how the quiet sounds when a room is empty and still full." They walked toward the door that wasn't chrome but might as well have sighed. As they passed the banner, the subtitle caught light, a suite for young hands and brave listeners, and for a moment Joe saw the year behind it. The late buses, the early coffee, the meetings where policy learned to bend toward outcome. He saw the year ahead and didn't try to imagine it into safety. He let it be big. At the threshold, he paused and listened. The auditorium exhaled, a warm winter bell. He placed one palm on the door, then moved through. The city outside wore December again. Inside, a room that once belonged to status now belonged to sound. Some things, it turned out, you measure not by what you see, but by what keeps ringing after the lights go gentle.